Welcome back, everybody. It's another episode of Important Work. I'm your host, Chris Angel. I'm here with my guest today, Debbie Heiser.
Hello.
Hello, hello. Thanks for being on the show.
Absolutely. Thanks for the invitation.
Yeah, we get to, we get the honor of producing your show called Faith Infused Leadership, which is so awesome. And I wanted to have you on and talk about that important work called Faith Infused Leadership. So, that's a big conversation. I don't know where, maybe the best place to start is with the problem. Why not just leadership? Why faith infused leadership? What is this in response to? What is the problem this is responding to? All that.
Yeah, Chris, what I found is part of my work and my calling is to help people uncover their calling. And so for me, a big piece of my life is around my faith. And I have a certain faith. Other people have different belief systems, and that's fine too. My theory is really, how do we step into leadership positions and show our faith, not sit there and pound people on the head that you need to believe this, that type of thing, but more so, how do we exude that faith that we have? And frankly, there's a lot of really tough conversations that are not taking place, in my opinion, around being a leader in a secular world where you have faith. And for me, that faith is Christianity, but it's really then about, how do I show in action? Yeah. I have some belief systems that sometimes may, I don't know, how do I want to say this? May kind of rub people the wrong way a little bit in the Christian faith. I think in the Christian faith, we've tried to put a box around God and so that we can understand him. Yeah. And I also think that too many times we fall into this judgment game when we think people need to believe exactly the same way we believe because these rules that we created around it. And so I have a really firm belief that really my responsibility is to have a really strong relationship for me with God. So with somebody else, that might be Buddha, it might be somebody else. Sure. But for me, it's more about that and then loving people where they're at. And so in order to love people where they're at, I have to be really solid in what I believe, but there's ways that you can live that out as a leader, whether it be in an organization, whether it be in your own business, whether it be in a volunteer situation. Yep. And I think people sometimes get that muddied and think they can't let people know that they have a faith or something, all this separation of church and state and all these types of things. Yeah. When it's just about showing up and being your authentic human self.
I was going to say, I feel like I can relate to this. I don't know that I would identify with the label of Christian anymore. What I would say is I have a ton of faith. If I think about the things I believe in, my relationship to God, I would still use the word God, divine consciousness. I completely believe there is an absolute truth. There's a source to things. And when I think about my work in the world is absolutely an expression of that spiritual place or that soul place. And so to your point of having tough conversations or, when people, there's not a lot of agreement in the world for the kind of marketing that I'm teaching, which is let's be vulnerable and let's share our, our struggles with the world as a form of marketing. Most people are like, what? That's crazy. That's stupid. We don't share our weaknesses. We're supposed to have the answers. We don't share that we don't have answers in marketing. And my faith, right? If I didn't have a faith in that truth, in the truth, faith in the truth, if I can say it that way, because that feels right. Faith in the truth of it, then everybody's opinion could swerve me one way or the other. And I wouldn't be able to have hard conversations with people about what I believe to be true. Right. That's what I hear you saying. Is that a fair interpretation of that, or
it is?
Is that all wrong?
No, that's a great way to put it. And for me, then it's, how do we put this? My background tends to be in corporate, and then in the last 5 years in a small local owned business and as an entrepreneur. And so there are kind of different ways you can maneuver that, I think, in a larger organization. And so for me too, it's how do you infuse that into how you are in the workplace? So kind of like what you were saying is, I have faith in the truth and being vulnerable, which is why your message about marketing is that way. And how can we then be servant leaders without people thinking, oh, they're a doormat, we're going to walk all over them? No way. Because a servant leader is about being courageous. It's about, confronting conflict in a loving manner. And so,
So so walk me through some of the challenges that you feel like faith infused leadership is in response to. Like, so one of the things you had mentioned was people can have different opinions, and if you can't stand in your truth, then you'll cave. What are some other things that you're seeing that are problems that?
Yeah. So I think honestly, Chris, the number one problem that has been highlighted for me, both in my clients and in the workshops that I do, and just people I talk to in general, and even myself, is this whole idea of self-worth. Mm-hmm. And I know that seems like a really nebulous issue, but meaning that if I don't believe I'm worth mm-hmm. a larger source creating me, loving me, putting me into, these opportunities to walk in my own truth, then it makes it really hard for me to go out and love other people. Mm. And so, like biblically, it even says, love your neighbor as you love yourself. Mm. So for me, it's kind of focusing that not on this little s ego self, but more on how can we not love ourselves if we have a higher power mm-hmm. that loves us. So how then do we take that into the workplace without people feeling like we're proselytizing, or, there's a lot of fear about speaking about what you do or what you believe. And it does have to be done lightly. And so to me, that's the big pain point too. I know when I was in corporate America, I was also a youth pastor for high school and post-high school youth at the same time. Mm-hmm. And so people knew that I had a belief system and that I had a faith because I talked about what we would do on the weekend, but I didn't talk to them about it's my job to convert you to what I believe.
Right.
And that's the big difference. But it's how do we, when we go to fire people, because you have to fire people, when we go to having tough counseling, to me, there's a difference between coaching people in development and then counseling to say, you're not cutting the mustard. We got to figure something else out here.
Right.
How do you take in those tougher situations and handle conflict or even help develop people? I joke sometimes on mine that we think everybody, once you're in a big organization, everybody thinks everybody should be the CEO. Well, no, not everybody wants that. And so it's really about understanding people and loving people where they're at.
How do we have thwe'll just use the example of the tough conversation. So how does faith infused leadership support or make that tough conversation easier or better or whatever?
Yeah. So my hope is on the episodes, I actually give some, what I call inner game and outer game. So inner game, kind of figuring out what it is that you believe about something, and then also some tips and techniques and some tools to use in those situations. And then I'm in the process of planning an actual intensive kind of workshop weekend. And when I say intensive, I don't mean that to be overwhelming, but where we dig into some of these questions, some of these pain points that people are finding, like how do I talk about my faith without people thinking I'm trying to get them to believe what I believe, or how can I just bring this up? And it does, unfortunately, it is a varying degree of sensitivity depending on the level that you are in the organization.
What do you mean? Explain that.
The higher up that you get, the higher level of sensitivity to that. Meaning that as an executive at Sprint, if I spoke about my faith in a way that wasn't just, oh yeah, we took the kids to Young Christians Weekend this weekend, and the youth group that I do, I blah, 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 blah. Like there's not as much of a sensitivity to that type of conversation, where if I said, in my belief system, when someone is really going through a tough time, can I pray for you? That may be higher sensitivity as an executive, because then, just like if you send an email at 10 p.m. or on the weekend, your people get an insinuated expectation that you think they should be working those hours too. It's more of that insinuation as a leader. And so there are things that each person and each organization will be different, but kind of talking about how do you maneuver through that? And then if someone does say, whoa, wait a minute, that's uncomfortable for me, then how do you maneuver in that?
Right. Wow. Yeah, seriously. I was thinking about the current events lately, whether it's political current events or shootings that have been happening. there are a lot of, there's a lot of stimulus, a lot of events, things that we bump up against that if we didn't have a true north, if we didn't have a sense of identity or belonging or something, it could really affect, to go back to your original problem, like self-worth, like, what is this all for? Why am I here? Like, it's hard to bring leadership to the table if there isn't a centeredness in what you believe and moreover, what you believe about yourself. And I see that a lot right now. I think I'm seeing a lot of people on Facebook. We spend a lot of time on Facebook that are just trying to talk through their anger and their frustration and all this stuff. And I mean, what's your take on that? How do you feel like the faith side of this conversation, not so much the leadership, but the faith side of this conversation helps that?
Yeah, I actually just this morning was having a conversation with someone, Chris, and I said, I'm going to be so bold as to say, I think we have a self-worth epidemic in this nation. And because when hurt people hurt other people, and when we don't have our own self-worth, we don't see other people as worthy, which to me is the root of a lot of these extenuating circumstances. I just had a conversation with my sister, and she said, why do we live in a world where I have to talk to my 13-year-old and 17-year-old who are going to a public event in LA and coach them on what to do if there's a mass shooting? Wow. Like, you know, like how I can't even imagine being 17 and having to walk through that conversation with my parents. And I'm thankful I didn't. But so my take on that is that there are a lot of people that have lost that compass in their life. And again, I'm not saying people have to believe what I believe, but I think when you have, to your point, that compass or that true north, then you have more even faith in yourself and confidence, and you feel more worthy. And so therefore you treat people differently. And again, it's not, the faith brings in some of that self-worth, and it's a combination of both self-worth and the faith. And I don't think you can have one without the other. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Last summer I read most of Man's Search for Meaning. Yeah. With Viktor Frankl. And I kind of skipped the middle part because it just got a lot into the whole concentration camp thing. And I was like, okay.
It's pretty dark in the middle.
It's pretty depressing. But the lessons and the stories that he talked about in there were so powerful about just, we have this innate desire to have meaning for the thing. And when we can create meaning in our life, you know, like life is different. Life is beautiful. Life is, you know, something else. And I think a lot of people are wrestling with that meaning. They haven't found that meaning for them. And I know that faith becomes this inroad to that meaning.
Yeah. And you know, it's interesting that you say that, Chris, because another piece to this that I see is that we've lost sight. We're in this instant gratification world. And so we've lost the sight of a bigger purpose. And what I mean by that, and I'm making a gross overgeneralization when I say we. Yeah. So I'm aging myself here, but when I sold Yellow Pages, there was an excellent trainer and a manager I had who said, you're not selling Yellow Pages, you're helping people get their hopes, wishes, and dreams. Because as a business owner, if I'm bringing more people into my business, and back in the day when people used to use Yellow Pages, that was a big draw for people in the local community. And so by bringing in more profit, we were helping those people achieve those hopes, wishes, and dreams. As an entrepreneur today and as a coach, my calling is to help inspire other people. It's to ignite their passion and help them step into that calling. That's the bigger purpose. And I think as business owners, as organizations, other than just the Wall Street P&L, we've lost sight of what that bigger picture, what are we doing in service to other people? And I think we've lost a lot of that. So when you lose that bigger picture, and things become tough, it's hard to stay on the path. And when you're confronted with your dark self, I was watching a documentary the other day called Finding Joseph. And it was about this gentleman who's a philosopher. And he was talking about how Greek mythology a lot of times are just analogies for where we're at. And he was talking about Arthur and the Round Table and how in today's day and age, it's hard to face our dark side because we have a light side and a dark side, and it's hard to face that dark side because we've lost sense of our bigger purpose and this compass that we have. And he was talking about how the Knights of the Round Table all had to go into this dark forest, our dark side,
Yeah.
and they figured out that the most honorable thing to do was for each of them to make their own path within the dark side. And that if you were following someone else's, if you were following a path that was already created, that was a sure tell sign that you were not on your own path. Mm-hmm. And I see that very relevant to today when you talk about self-worth. People are just wanting the quick fix. They go down somebody else's path. They go into the comparison game. And so we compare, oh, so-and-so is doing this, I should do this exact same thing. Well, no, that's not what your passion is. You know, like I look at you and you're forging kind of this way with this different way to market that's more authentic versus just selling something. And that's a different path.
Yeah. What is the darkness? What's the role of the darkness in that? What's the good of the darkness?
Yeah, the good of the darkness is understanding yourself as a holistic person. You know, I used to joke, I had a friend that I used to call Positive Pollyanna because everything was always positive. There's always a silver lining. And I'm like, stop. Because so many times too, we don't allow ourselves to feel some of those dark feelings. You know, we don't allow ourselves to feel and discuss the anger. We don't discuss and feel the sadness that we have, or even the utter dismay about certain things. And so what I see happening too, not to get political, but I see a polarization happening. And honestly, people that are upset by one group showing hatred, they're doing the same thing, just in a different manner. And it's so polarizing. And to me, that's the dark side, is if we feel confident and we have that self-worth, we can look at our shadow self and not be afraid of it.
Right. It's like without looking at the shadow, without spending time in it,
You're
and looking at it, like staring at it.
Yeah.
I can just think of all the times where I didn't want to look at it. I resisted it. I suppressed it. I pushed it down. It was like, it felt bad. It's like, I felt like I wasn't supposed to explore like the dark side or the darkness or my bad thoughts or all the stuff. And so it comes out sideways. I think darkness comes out if you don't address it and almost befriend it. If you don't,
it comes out.
It'll find its way out for sure. And I think those are the destructive behaviors that we see, is where people are. It's being acted out because they haven't actually gone and made peace with it. And I think that actually, I mean, to the point of faith infused leadership, I think it takes some faith to go into the shadows and to stare it down, and to, we used to call it slaying dragons. And so someday I may get a sleeve tattoo. I'm not willing to do it without a good story though. So it has to have a good story and mean something to me. But like I could see this thing where like on the beginning of the journey, it's like you're fighting dragons, but at some point you turn a corner and you realize like you could actually train your dragon, right? How to train your dragon. You could actually train your dragon and become friends with this dark side. And it would really serve you. Anyway, I think it takes faith to go down and stare that in the face, to stare a dragon in the face.
Absolutely. And so the whole premise of this documentary that I watched was about the hero story. And he was the gentleman that came up with the hero story, and a lot of like marketing right now too. Is showing some of that. And so to that point, when you go in and you investigate and you observe and you bend the beam of observation back to yourself versus on everybody else, which you have 3 fingers pointed at you when you point the finger. And when you do that, then to your point, you can look at kind of I don't know if I want to label it right and wrong, good or bad or whatever, but it's a Star Wars-y thing, right? But you can see the good and the evil and the bad and kind of figure out, because sometimes that dark side is needed. And you can kind of figure out when it's appropriate to do certain things or act on those things. But if you don't investigate that, it does come out and it manifests itself in these negative behaviors.
It's interesting. The whole connotation of faith is it's a spiritual conversation. We're having a spiritually infused leadership. And I think, I think we are spiritual beings having a minor physical experience, for 80 to 100 years. And I think that I also believe that we are we come from source, we come from spirit. So, but I think when we don't recognize the spirit side of things, we live from the physical plane, and we end up having these things like we're afraid of what's lurking back there in the shadow and the energy of it all. But if we could absorb it, the word that comes to mind, like if all of the energy is energy and we're able to absorb it, then there's no threat, and you can be appropriate with it, right? Rather than be scared by it.
Right.
Because you recognize it as just, it's all energy. It's all spirit. It all comes from the same place.
It's all quantum physics, Chris.
I know, right?
Yeah. And so when you look at quantum physics, even then you look at the law of attraction. Like I think of now too, because people haven't observed their darker side and we're seeing some of this behavior manifest itself, then what's happening is it's like, I don't know, I'm talking way out here, but it's like one mass shooting happens and then all of a sudden there's 3 and then there's 5 and then there's 10. And it just seems to exponentially get larger and larger, the amount of these that we see. And it's not necessarily happening in other countries. And I don't have the right answer for it, but I just look at that and I think we are really struggling as a country, and that's not politically. It's just, I think even that spiritual basis and people having some spiritual awareness.
So I would imagine in some of the work you do, whether it's workshops, do you do one-on-one work also, or what kind of work do you do?
I do. I coach both men and women, small, medium-sized businesses, and really work with businesses that are starting up or scaling in size.
I would imagine there are moments for the conversation of like shadow work, talking about shadow, looking at the dark side. Like, how do you coach them through that?
Well, it depends. And Chris, what I mean by that is it really depends on the self-awareness of the person I'm working with.
Yeah.
Now, part of my ideal client is to work with people that are ready to accelerate their business and look both at the inner and outer game. A lot of times, business consultants will just look at the outer game plans and figure out what needs to change organizationally, but really the people have to change internally. So there are some people that within 2 meetings, we're digging in and they are jumping into some of those behaviors, and everybody has a money story. Everybody has a work story. I mean, I just uncovered myself that part of what's been holding me back for exponential change in my business is because my mom died of breast cancer, and she swore to her last living breath that it was the hormones that she took 15 years ago for menopause and owning her own business. What a story I had, right? Wow. So once I was aware of that, I'm able to work through that and acknowledge it, but put it to the side and say, that's not true. I'm not killing myself. If anything, people are telling me I look younger because I'm stepping into my calling. And so it kind of depends on where people are at in their self-awareness. Typically, I get everyone to do some exercises around their money story and their work story particularly. And sometimes we even untangle back to high school. Seems to be a big one that people have incidences that happen that create these limiting beliefs, but it's really about finding those. So long answer, the short answer is it depends on where the person's at. I have a toolbox of all of these different tools that I use, but I don't have like this set methodology that says, okay, Chris, we're going to do step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, because you might have done some work on your money story and know how you feel about money and interact with that. Got it. We may not need to do that. So, but I use meditations. I use sculpture work, but it's kind of like play therapy a little bit to get people to look at those emerging futures. So
yeah, that's really cool. The story. Yeah. I mean, like if you think about shadow, so I'm trying to play this out for people listening, like, we all have stories that run our lives.
Yeah.
Our life is a response to a story we created somewhere. And until we expose the story or see it for what it is, it's running the show. Once we can look at the story, this is the part where it feels like a shadow to me, or the dark and scary side of it is you look at the story and you have to actually look at not only what happened. I remember, for example, one time this is probably middle school. This is a big story I had in life called I Can't Do It. And so I Can't Do It ran the show for a long time. It had me make decisions that either felt easy or it had me avoid opportunities that felt too hard. I wouldn't stretch myself. I'd only take risks if I felt like I could win, like whatever. But this story called I Can't Do It started when something as simple as my dad was trying to help me with a math problem. He was very good at math. I sucked at math. And he was like, he got mad at me, like in a heartbeat. He went from like helping me to like mad that I couldn't figure it out. And I was in this moment where I just was like, fine, I can't do it. And then, right. And then there's this story that got birthed called I Can't Do It. And I started to avoid the feelings. This is the dark side, is the feeling of my dad doesn't love me, which wasn't the case, but that's part of the story. I'm like, I'm stupid. I'm dumb because I can't figure this out. Clearly it's easy for him. What's wrong with me? That goes back to self-worth. So now I'm like, now my self-esteem is like, I'm dumb. I'm a loser. I can't figure things out. So these are the things we don't want to look at in the shadow, called, the things we made up about ourselves. Like, right. I'm dumb. I'm a loser. My dad doesn't love me. All that. But that's super cerebral, like at the surface, because most of us don't want to go down and actually get present to the feeling, right, of what that was like in order to heal it and mend it and neutralize it. Yeah. Anyway, that's just what we do.
And, it's interesting, Chris, because I use this exercise that I actually learned from a business mentor of mine, and I use it for both work stories, money stories. You could use it with any story, where I tell people, do it by yourself because people think you're really wacky if they walk in on you.
Yeah.
I'll use money as an example. A lot of us heard, get your chores done and then you can play.
Right.
And we wonder why we're in this frenzied world of, because as a small business owner or an entrepreneur, your work is never done.
Right. Yeah.
So, this list goes on, and then you don't play and you wonder why you're burnt out. So I ask people to sit in front of a blank wall, have a journal, and I suggest also to voice memo yourself so that you can hear the conversation.
Yeah.
And it sounds really wacky, but I ask people to look at the wall and have a conversation with money. And money is the wall. And it's really interesting what comes out of that. And then once they're done, sit down and journal everything that they can think of, themes, don't judge it, just write everything down. Then you turn it around and you become the wall and money becomes you, and you talk back to yourself as money. And it's really, cool. It's mind blowing.
Yeah.
And it sounds really wacky, but you can do it around a work story. You could do it around parents, and I'm a firm believer too. I mean, you can always go back and look at things that your parents did, but I am a firm believer. Maya Angelou says, if I knew better, I'd do better. And kind of this thing around, if my parents knew better, they would have done better. They did a great job with what they knew at the time. And so I can't place blame on them, but there are certain things that happen in your life. Even hearing, like I even uncovered back when I was 5, hearing, oh, you didn't get your boy again, Keith, to my dad, right? Thinking, I'm not worth it because I'm a girl. He wanted a boy. It wasn't him, but to your point, your mind takes all these different mind warps. So you can do that exercise with pretty much any story that you have. And it's really revealing what comes out of that.
That's so cool. I love that. I do think that there is, there's an awakening, if you want to call it that. I think people are waking up. There's a rising of consciousness where people are, like, you can see it in very specific things, like the word vulnerability has been used a ton in the last couple of years. Authenticity has been used a ton in the last couple, like these trending words that are sort of leading indicators of people waking up.
Yeah.
And I feel like this kind of work where we start to make peace with and neutralize the stories we've told ourselves are paramount. They're like critical to not just business success, but marriages, relationship success, parenting success, money success, all of that stuff. Because there's a story running the show. And until you neutralize that story, you're at the mercy of the story. You have no control in this matter. You may think you do, but that's a mirage, because it's the story that's running the show. So I love that this is the kind of work that you do. I mean, it's so cool to unpack faith-infused leadership, because there's so much more under the surface than at first glance, like as it is with any phrase, right? Like my show, Marketing for the Rest of Us, this show, Important Work, like there's so much under the surface of it. But I just really appreciate you coming on and talking about what it is that you do and your heart for the change you want to see in the world. If people want to work with you, they want to come to a workshop or bring you into their company, how do people connect with you?
Yeah, thank you, Chris. They can go out to my website, and it's www.3VinVictorConsulting.com. You can also follow me on YouTube, Facebook, or Instagram at 3V Consulting. Some of them say 3 Vines. Those URLs you had to go with the ones.
Right. I know. Yeah.
So,
tech stuff.
Yeah. Plus, a lot of people, when I say 3 vines, they think I'm a winery, which I'm not. But
Maybe that would be a side hustle.
Absolutely. But I'm on all of those social media platforms with the exception of Twitter and Snapchat. But otherwise, you can reach me. The website's actually the best place to go because it's got the most inclusive information. So
good. Thanks, Debbie. I appreciate that you came on the show today. I also love that we're producing your show for you. I love that you're bringing this message to the world. So thanks for all that you do. And I get to see you some other time. But until then, take care.
Great. Thanks, Chris.
Do you have important work in the world? We can help you produce a show just like this one and get your message out in the world. Go to mygroundswell.com to connect with us now.